Chapter 130. At this point, many boys and girls on the field could only vaguely see the towering moon worship temple standing on the top of the mountain 10 miles away. But even so, a majestic and desolate aura continued to rise, as if illuminating the 100,000 mountains. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, was full of awe. He glanced at the boys and girls and whispered, "We just need to wait here now. Remember, don't take a step forward." The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, warned with a serious expression. Yes. Several boys and girls subconsciously took a few steps back. Moon worship really knows how to choose a place. Su Qin's eyes were calm as he looked at moon worship. Moon worship was surrounded by cliffs on all sides. As long as they guard the only way, even if they are besieged by millions of troops, they will be safe. As for the martial artists, unless it is a group of upper-realm martial artists who rush to the moon worship temple regardless of life and death, no matter how many ordinary martial artists there are, it will be useless. Because they can't touch moon worship at all. Su Qin thought as he opened Eyes of Truth. Suddenly, in the moon worship 10 miles away, auras appeared one after another. These auras were strong or weak, similar to martial artists, but they also revealed other strange auras. The disciples of moon worship are not martial artists. They cultivate witchcraft and curses, using voodoo insects as the foundation to kill people invisibly. Su Qin looked at the auras in moon worship and thought silently. However, in the entire moon worship, only 2 auras have reached grade 1. It's nothing to worry about. Su Qin observed for a moment and had a general understanding of moon worship. But why don't I notice the aura of moon god? Su Qin frowned slightly. He looked at the entire moon worship with Eyes of Truth, but he didn't find the so-called moon god at all. In order to be foolproof, Su Qin continued to observe with Eyes of Truth for a while until he confirmed all the trump cards of moon worship. He shook his head slightly. Forget it. There's no need to waste time. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated as he took a step forward. Hong Fei, the middle-aged man not far away, was shocked when he saw this scene. He immediately dissuaded, "Your Excellency, this is the Holy Moon Church. Our every move is under the watch of the Holy Moon Church. Please be cautious." The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, thought that Su Qin was impatient and wanted to follow the chain to the moon worship center. This behavior seemed normal, but in fact, it was a provocation to moon worship. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, knew the rules of moon worship very well. No matter who it was, even if it was a king, they had to wait patiently. However, anyone who violated this rule would be hunted down by the entire moon worship. With the influence of the moon worship in Nanzhao, coupled with the strange and unpredictable witchcraft curses, anyone who was hunted down by them would die. However, the next moment, under the incredulous gaze of the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, Su Qin stretched out his right hand, slowly raised it, and pressed it toward the moon worship center from 10 miles away. In an instant, the wind on the top of the mountain seemed to stop, and a dark golden Buddha palm covered the world. Moon worship. In a majestic and tall temple, the moon worshippers and the elders sat cross-legged, looking silent as if they were troubled by something. A few years ago, our saintess fell in Chang and of the Empire of Tang. At this time, the moon worshippers suddenly stood up, looked down at the elders, and said in a deep voice. As soon as these words came out, the hearts of all the elders present trembled. A few years ago, the moon worship deliberately sent the saintess to Chang, and in order to set up a trap in the Empire of Tang, they wanted to plant a nail in the Li royal family. However, everyone, including the moon worshippers, didn't expect that the saintess not only failed to complete the mission of the saint sect, but also died in Chang'an city. Moreover, according to the white-haired old woman who came back from Chang'an city alive, the saintess died in a sword light that came from the sky. Not only did the saintess die, but even the most ancient venomous insect in the entire moon worship was also cut into nothingness. When this news reached the ears of the elders and the sect leader, everyone felt as if they had been struck by lightning. Although they didn't know who had cut the sword light, they knew very well that the other party was not someone that the moon worship could deal with. Even in the following years, the moon worship was trembling in fear, fearing that one day the other party would come to their door. Sect leader, why did you mention this? An elder couldn't help but ask. The other elders heard this and also looked at the moon worshippers. The saintess did fall in Chang'an City, but so what? According to what the white-haired old woman said at that time, the person who did it was at least a peak grade 1 great grandmaster. It was far from what the moon worship could deal with. The vitality of a peak grade 1 great grandmaster is enough to ignore all witchcraft curses. What I want to say is, the moon worshippers paused and continued, the saint sect is about to take revenge with their own hands. What? Many of the elders were puzzled and puzzled. Revenge? How can the saint sect take revenge? The other party didn't even show their face and cut the most ancient venomous insect of the saint sect into nothingness. How can they take revenge? Just as the elders were in a state of shock and uncertainty, the moon worshippers said slowly, I have learned the will of the moon god. After this sacrifice, the moon god will manifest in the world. When these words came out, the faces of all the elders changed. The moon god will manifest in the world. This, sect master, is what you said true? The voice of an elder trembled as he looked at the moon worshippers with great excitement. Of course, the moon worshippers nodded slightly, and their tone was also full of fanaticism. In the eyes of all the moon worship disciples, the moon god is invincible. As long as the moon god takes action, no one in the world can stop their moon worship. With the protection of the moon god, why would the saint sect hide in Nanzhao? Yes, no matter who killed the saintess, just wait for death obediently. Sect master, it is better for the saint sect to start gathering disciples now. When the moon god manifests in the world, we will kill our way to Chang'an City and avenge the saintess. Many elders began to clamor. When the moon worshippers heard this, they waved their hands and said, it is only a matter of time before we kill our enemies. Soon, the saint sect will rule the world. Every word of the moon worshippers was filled with strong confidence. Just as the elders and the sect master were discussing how to torture the person who killed the saintess, suddenly, there was a commotion outside. What's going on? The moon worshippers frowned. The other elders also looked dissatisfied. They were just looking forward to the future, but they were interrupted. Let's go out and take a look. The moon worshippers faintly felt that something was wrong. They directly got up and walked out of the hall. The elders looked at each other and could only follow behind the sect master. However, when the moon worshippers walked out of the holy temple, they found that all the disciples were looking at the sky with incomparable horror. The moon worshippers and the elders suppressed the doubts in their hearts and raised their heads to look at the sky. The next moment, the moon worshippers saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. They saw a glass Buddha palm that spanned across the void, blooming with endless pure light, exuding a posture that encompassed heaven and earth. The glass Buddha palm became bigger and bigger, as if it came from above the 9 heavens. A sacred, solemn, pure, and heavy aura instantly suppressed down. At this moment, the sky darkened. Chapter 131. Outside the holy sanctum. The moon worshippers and the elders trembled as they stared in disbelief at the Buddha's palm that was slowly falling from the sky. What is that? The moon worshippers were shocked as they felt a terrifying pressure suddenly descending. Under this pressure, all the disciples in the holy sanctum couldn't help but kneel down, not daring to look directly at the Buddha's palm that was shrouding heaven and earth. Even the elders of the holy sanctum were forced to bend their backs. Only the moon worshippers and the other holy emissary were barely holding on. But it was obvious that with the continuous pressure of the dark golden Buddha's palm, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. In the blink of an eye, the moon worshippers finally broke free from the shock. They realized that if they continued like this, they would be crushed by the Buddha's palm in a few seconds at most. Run! The moon worshippers' eyes were red as they frantically burned their blood essence. Even the life-venomous worm in their body was alarmed as it let out a sharp cry. Screech! A pale golden shadow of a venomous worm appeared behind the moon worshippers. Suddenly, the moon worshippers' aura began to soar as if there was no end to it. The moon worshippers stepped on the ground fiercely as their bodies turned into phantoms and leaped out of the holy sanctum. In addition to the moon worshippers, the other holy emissary also did the same. He desperately broke free from the pressure of the Buddha's palm and fled in the opposite direction of the moon worshippers. Whether it was the moon worshippers or the holy emissary, they didn't even think about the elders and other disciples of the holy sanctum. Because they knew very well in their hearts that under this glazed Buddha palm, the holy moon church was finished, completely and utterly finished. Want to run? Su Qin, who was 10 miles away, saw this scene and shook his head slightly. He didn't care at all. His palm wasn't the real Buddha's palm. It was just a simulation of the concept. But even so, it wasn't something that any 9th-grade martial artist could resist. As expected, the moon worshippers and the other saint who had escaped suddenly realized that under the suppression of the glazed Buddha palm, even though they had broken free and regained their mobility, their speed was as slow as a tortoise's. According to their current speed, it would take them several days to escape from the moon worship. And in just a few days, not to mention a few days, even if it was just a few seconds, moon worship would be crushed several times by the glazed Buddha palm. No! Under the despairing gazes of the moon worshippers, the saint, and countless other disciples, the dark golden glazed Buddha palm came crashing down. At this moment, everything shattered. The entire moon worship temple collapsed and turned into dust, completely disappearing from the world. If someone were to look from a distance, they would find that a section of the mountain where the holy moon church was located had been cut off, and on the mirror-like surface of the mountain, there was a faint imprint of a Buddha's palm that could penetrate heaven and earth. From beginning to end, from the leader of the moon worship sect to the many disciples, no one knew what had happened. It's over. Su Qin's eyes were calm, and his thoughts were unruffled. Although the moon worship sect had a supreme status in Nanzhao, in fact, its actions were no different from those of the demon sect. Wantonly killing, using living beings as sacrifices to the moon god, these were as simple as drinking water and eating in the eyes of the moon worship sect. The Buddha's palm is powerful, but for me now, if I want to really use it, I'm afraid I'll need to use at least 60% of my true essence and divine will. Su Qin roughly estimated in his mind. His palm just now was just a simulation of the real Buddha's palm, but Su Qin also had a rough idea of how much energy he would need to use the Buddha's palm. At this moment, the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, who was about to persuade Su Qin, stood there dumbfounded. The boys and girls next to him were also dumbfounded, their faces full of disbelief. They looked at Su Qin and the moon worship sect that had been completely reduced to dust with terrified eyes. The saint sect? The saint sect is gone. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei's teeth were chattering, and he almost thought he was dreaming. The moon worship sect had dominated Nanzhao for hundreds of thousands of years. Even the lords of Nanzhao treated the disciples of the saint sect with respect. To some extent, moon worship sect could replace Nanzhao with just a thought. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, would never have dreamed that the supreme moon worship sect in his eyes would one day be destroyed by a palm. Thinking of this, the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, stiffened. He looked at the figure not far away and stood there respectfully, not daring to have any thoughts. Because he knew in his heart that even a giant like the moon worship sect was like an ant in the hands of Su Qin, let alone them. You can go. Su Qin glanced at the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, and said casually. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, was not a member of the moon worship sect. As for the boys and girls beside him, they did not have the time to join the saint sect. Although Su Qin can destroy the holy moon church with a raise of his hand without frowning, he will not kill innocent people. Su Qin destroyed the moon worship sect because the moon worship sect provoked him first. Yes, we will go now. When the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, heard Su Qin's words, it was as if he had been granted amnesty. He immediately took the young boys and girls next to him and respectfully retreated. When they were some distance away from Su Qin, they fled without looking back. The middle-aged man suddenly had a thought in his mind. The moon worship sect has suppressed Nanzhao for hundreds of thousands of years. Now that it has been destroyed, the impact on Nanzhao is far-reaching. After the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, and the others left, Su Qin took another look at the mountain where the moon worship sect was originally located and was ready to return to the Empire of Tang. However, just then, Su Qin's expression changed slightly, and he released a huge amount of divine sense in an instant. Interesting. There was an inexplicable look on Su Qin's face, and he took a step forward and disappeared. When Su Qin reappeared, he was already standing on the mountain where the moon worship sect was originally located. Before the moon worship sect was destroyed, this position was a certain position deep in the holy temple. At this moment, not far from Su Qin, a jade statue about the height of a person stood there quietly. The jade statue is a woman. Her face is hazy and cannot be seen clearly. One can only vaguely recognize that there is a faint full moon mark on the jade statue's eyebrows. If it was an ordinary person, even a grade 1 great grandmaster, seeing this jade statue, although they would be surprised why the jade statue was so lifelike, they would not think much about it. After all, no matter how lifelike a jade statue is, it is just a jade statue. It has no life. At most, its value is a little higher, but for a martial artist, it is nothing at all. However, Su Qin took a closer look at the jade statue. After a while, a smile appeared on his face and he said, "You don't want to come out now, do you want me to do it?" Chapter 132. Why don't you come out now? Are you waiting for me to make a move? Su Qin's voice rang out. At this time, there was no one around him, as if he was talking to the air. However, a moment later, the jade statue not far from Su Qin suddenly emitted a faint light, and then an illusory figure appeared. Greetings, fellow Daoist. The illusory figure wore a palace dress and looked pure, but there was an indescribable charm in every part of her. White skin, graceful figure. Are you the moon god, worshipped by the moon-worshipping cult? Su Qin looked at the illusory figure with interest. In Su Qin's eyes, the illusory figure in the palace dress was just a strand of divine sense of a certain martial arts legend, but it was different from the divine sense left in the jade pendant by the founder of the Empire of Tang. The other party was not without a master, but had her own consciousness. Moon god, you flatter me, the figure in the palace dress sighed and said, I just want to live. The world is unfair. Even if you become a martial arts legend, you can only live for 500 years, Shoyuan. Once 500 years have passed, no matter how strong you are, you will disappear. At this point, the figure in the palace dress paused for a while and continued, there is a way to live forever overseas, but it can only extend one's life by 1 or 200 years at most. If you want to live forever, you have to transcend the 9 heavens legends and become an earth immortal. Have you been overseas? Su Qin looked at the figure in the palace dress and suddenly became interested. Originally, Su Qin planned to directly destroy the illusory figure and then return to the Emperor of Tang Palace as soon as possible. But seeing that the figure in the palace dress seemed to know something about overseas, he was not in a hurry for the time being. Anyway, the figure in the palace dress was right in front of him. With Su Qin's ability, even if she recovered to her peak, she might not be his opponent, let alone now when she was only left with a strand of divine sense. Since Su Qin attained the Arhat fruit, he had heard of overseas more than once, but he had not seen much specific information. It was as if to all martial arts legends or venerable Arhat, overseas was a taboo that they could not talk about. 300 years ago, I once crossed the sea. In the depths of the endless sea, the heaven and earth yuan qi was abundant. Compared to this continent, that place was like another world. As the beautiful figure in the palace dress spoke, she seemed to have fallen into some kind of memory. Unfortunately, even with the favorable environment in the depths of the endless ocean, the last land immortal that appeared was 1,000 years ago. Land immortal? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. Earth immortal was the realm after martial arts legend. It was said that Earth immortals had a lifespan of more than 1,000 years. They were indeed no different from real immortals. Do you mean that even overseas, there are no land immortals? Su Qin asked. At least, that's what I understand. The beautiful figure in the palace dress shook her head and said, there are many experts in the sea, but no one knows about the immortals of the land. There aren't even any rumors about it, the beautiful figure in the palace dress sighed. I even began to doubt whether the so-called land immortal realm really exists. The last land immortal that appeared 1,000 years ago was probably just a rumor. The beautiful figure in the palace dress tone was filled with despair. Any martial artist who stepped into the martial arts legend realm was one in a billion. Since they were young, they had overcome all obstacles and swept the world, invincible for an era. But in the end, they were forcefully trapped in the martial arts legend realm, unable to move forward and facing death alone. One could imagine the torment. I see. Su Qin was deep in thought. Although he had never been overseas, he guessed that what the beautiful figure in the palace dress said should be true. No matter how abundant the heaven and earth yuan qi was overseas, and no matter how many treasures there were, how could it compare to Su Qin? Not to mention other things, just the primordial spirit liquid and blood bodhi alone were probably scarce overseas. But Su Qin could eat them like candy every day. In addition to these two treasures, there were also a lot of other cultivation resources. But even so, Su Qin was still stuck in the fourth heavenly layer for several years, let alone the overseas martial arts legends. Therefore, if there were martial artists overseas who surpassed Su Qin, such as 5th heavenly layer or 6th heavenly layer legends, Su Qin would believe it. After all, those who were close to the end of the Shouyuan and had lived for almost 500 years could indeed reach this realm. But if there were land immortals who were completely above the martial arts legends, Su Qin would not believe it. Martial arts legends had a total of 500 years of Shouyuan, so how could they enter the land immortal realm? Of course, Su Qin was an exception. Although Su Qin was not a land immortal, he had the same Shouyuan as the land immortals and could live for 1,000 years. Fellow Daoist, just as Su Qin was thinking, the beautiful figure in the palace dress suddenly looked at Su Qin with a soft and pitiful gaze. I have lost my physical body, and only a strand of my divine sense is left. I am alone and have no one to rely on, so I hope fellow Daoist can take me in. The beautiful figure in the palace dress voice was soft, and a trace of an extremely charming aura began to spread. Don't worry, although I am useless, I was once a martial arts legend, so I still know some things about martial arts cultivation. Moreover, before I fell, I hid the treasures I obtained in a certain place. As long as fellow Daoist agrees, I will give you all my treasures. The beautiful figure in the palace dress words were full of fatal temptation. No matter what, the beautiful figure in the palace dress was still a martial arts legend. Her understanding of martial arts cultivation was a priceless treasure for any martial arts 9th grade martial artist, and it could save them a lot of detours. Even in the eyes of martial arts legends of the same level, it was a great reference. As for the treasures of a lifetime, it was even more amazing. What did it mean to have the treasures of a martial arts legend? Oh, is there such a good thing? A smile appeared on Su Qin's face as he looked at the beautiful figure in the palace dress. Of course, the beautiful figure in the palace dress was already within 5 meters of Su Qin without him noticing. As long as fellow Daoist, as the beautiful figure in the palace dress said this, her illusory figure suddenly blurred and instantly turned into a stream of light and rushed into Su Qin's forehead. Ha ha ha. You fell for my trick, didn't you? The beautiful figure in the palace dress voice rang in Su Qin's ears, and there was a hint of pride in it. From beginning to end, the beautiful figure in the palace dress had never thought of asking Su Qin to take her in. Instead, she was prepared to take over Su Qin's body. If Su Qin had remained vigilant and not let the beautiful figure in the palace dress get within 5 meters of him, no matter how capable the beautiful figure in the palace dress was, she would not have been able to do anything to Su Qin. However, the beautiful figure in the palace dress first used the information she knew about overseas as bait, and pretended to be harmless to lower Su Qin's vigilance. Finally, she lured him with treasures and successfully got within 5 meters of Su Qin. At this point, the beautiful figure in the palace dress plan was already more than half complete. Although I've been sleeping for hundreds of years, I've been using offerings to nourish my divine sense. Coupled with the fortuitous encounter overseas, my divine sense is stable and indestructible. I can't possibly possess a martial artist who has just entered the myth realm. The beautiful figure in the palace dress thoughts spun rapidly, and she was full of confidence. In her opinion, Su Qin had not even been overseas, and should have just entered the martial arts legend realm. At most, he was hovering around the second heaven, and could not possibly resist the invasion of her divine sense. Once I successfully occupy this body and have the power to protect myself, I'll be able to act freely in some matters. When the beautiful figure in the palace dress thought of this, a hint of excitement rose in her heart. Although after occupying Su Qin's body, she would have to change from a woman to a man, but as long as she could survive, what was the price to pay? Buzz! The beautiful figure in the palace dress divine sense quickly surged into Su Qin's forehead, and then into his ancestral aperture. Before the beautiful figure in the palace dress could make her next move, her eyes widened, and she looked at everything in front of her with incomparable shock. In the depths of the ancestral aperture, a giant golden Buddha stood quietly in the center of the world. It was infinitely huge, and its fingers touched the sky and the earth. It filled her vision, as if there was nothing more noble than it. The Buddha's light spread, illuminating the darkness and enveloping the void. Chapter 133. This is... The figure in the palace dress trembled as she looked in disbelief at the giant golden Buddha in the depths of her ancestral aperture. The Buddha's light spread. Crack. The figure in the palace dress felt her divine sense collapsing and dissipating. It was as if just looking at the giant golden Buddha was something she could never bear. Impossible? The figure in the palace dress felt as if her heart had fallen into an abyss. She had once traveled overseas and saw a fifth Heaven-defying realm martial artist from afar. At that time, that fifth Heaven-defying realm martial artist was no different from heaven and earth to the figure in the palace dress, but now, the figure in the palace dress subconsciously compared that fifth Heaven-defying realm martial artist to the giant golden Buddha in front of her, but found that the two were not on the same level at all. For this giant golden Buddha that filled heaven and earth, let alone a mere fifth Heaven-defying realm martial artist, even a true earth-defying realm martial artist was like an ant. I never thought that I would one day fall in the hands of such a great existence. Just as the figure in the palace dress had this thought, under the illumination of the Buddha's light, the figure maintained by her divine sense completely collapsed and disappeared. Outside, Su Qin touched his eyebrows as a strange look flashed across his face. He did not expect the figure in the palace dress to be so courageous that she dared to barge into his ancestral aperture with her divine sense and face the giant golden Buddha that symbolized the inheritance of the strongest divine skill, the Buddha's palm. One must know that even Su Qin was under great pressure when facing this giant golden Buddha. And this was under the premise that the giant golden Buddha recognized Su Qin as its master and would not harm Su Qin. As for the figure in the palace dress, if the figure in the palace dress turned around and ran, Su Qin might have to spend a moment to suppress her. But she barged into his ancestral aperture. It could only be said that she did not want to live anymore. On this trip, I've learned some news about the overseas world. Su Qin's mind entered the ancestral aperture between his eyebrows. He glanced at the golden Buddha that still seemed indestructible and eternal as he thought silently. After confirming that there was no Earth immortal powerhouse, Su Qin felt much more relaxed. To the overseas martial arts legends, becoming a terrestrial immortal was far out of their reach. In fact, it was basically a legend. However, in Su Qin's eyes, as long as they followed the prescribed order, it would take at most a few hundred years to achieve it. Compared to Su Qin's 1,000 years of Shouyuan's life, a few hundred years was not unacceptable. It was completely affordable. Right. I haven't signed in here yet. Su Qin calmed himself down and suddenly thought. When he left Chang, and this time, he deliberately left a sign-in opportunity. He wanted to see if he could find a new sign-in location on the way. Unfortunately, Su Qin walked all the way, especially after entering the 100,000 mountains. He slowed down almost to the extreme, but he still didn't find any other checkpoints. And now, this was the only place that Su Qin hadn't signed in yet. If this place still didn't meet the conditions for signing in, Su Qin could only rush back to the palace to sign in. System, sign in. Su Qin paused for a moment and said in his heart, "Congratulations to the host for signing in successfully. Obtained Moon Forging Divine Technique." Moon Forging Divine Technique? Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated. In the next moment, everything about the Moon Forging Divine Technique poured into Su Qin's mind. It turned out to be a secret technique to stabilize divine sense. Su Qin opened his eyes, a thoughtful look on his face. When he saw the beautiful figure in the palace dress just now, he was wondering why her divine sense was so stable. Now it seems that it was because of this secret technique. Good stuff. Su Qin nodded slightly, joy appeared on his face. Although a peak grade 1 great grandmaster can condense divine sense, and when one reaches the realm of Venerable Arhat, their divine sense can condense into a substance and can easily kill people with divine sense, create illusions, and so on. But even among Venerable Arhat, there are differences in divine sense. The stronger and more stable the divine sense, the more helpful it is for one's own cultivation. Some legends even completely give up on physical cultivation and focus on divine sense breakthroughs. But the Moon Forging Divine Technique can stabilize Su Qin's divine sense to a great extent. In the future, when Su Qin encounters legends with extremely powerful divine sense, although he can't say that he can win against them in a competition of divine sense, at least he won't be suppressed by them. This is the advantage of having a stable divine sense. It's time to go. When I return to the Imperial Palace, I will cultivate this Moon Forging Divine Technique. Su Qin took a step forward and disappeared, rushing towards the Chang and Imperial Palace. Shortly after Su Qin left, half a day later, someone discovered that the moon worship had disappeared. The news spread. The whole of Nanzhao was shaken. For hundreds of years, the moon worship has been in Nanzhao, and its status is higher than that of the previous rulers. How could such a behemoth disappear just like that? At first, no one believed it and thought it was nonsense. But as time passed, more and more people returned from the 100,000 mountains and repeated this matter, and everyone was stunned. Especially in the original position of the moon worship, there was a huge handprint, as if the entire moon worship had been erased by the owner of this handprint. Suddenly, Nanzhao fell into a panic. That was the moon worship. How could it be erased just like that? If it was said that the other martial arts sects in the world joined forces to fight the moon worship for several days and nights, and finally destroyed the moon worship, it would be barely acceptable. But what was the truth? The moon worship disappeared silently, as if it had never appeared at all. Who on earth pressed that handprint? Who pressed it? I think it's a real immortal. I'm afraid only a real immortal can do this. Countless people in Nanzhao whispered, and their tone was full of awe. For them, the existence that could destroy the entire moon worship with a single palm was no different from immortal, even if it wasn't. Nanzhao Lord looked anxious, and kept pacing back and forth. What should we do? What should we do? The sect leader has disappeared, the elders have disappeared, and everything of the saint has disappeared, Nanzhao Lord muttered to himself, and his face was full of fear. At this moment, one of the officials below suddenly stood up. Your Majesty, perhaps the disappearance of the Holy Church is not a bad thing for our Nanzhao. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of many ministers on the scene changed slightly. If the moon worship still existed, no minister would dare to have such thoughts. But now that the saint had disappeared, from the moon worshippers to the disciples of the saint, no one had survived, and some thoughts were naturally born. For hundreds of thousands of years, the status of the moon worship in Nanzhao was so high that it could easily interfere with the replacement of the Lord. And now, the moon worship had disappeared, which was equivalent to a shackle on Nanzhao's body had disappeared with it. Chapter 134. While Nanzhao was in a sensation, Su Qin had returned to the Emperor of Tang's palace. Su Qin naturally didn't know the impact of his destruction of moon worship on Nanzhao. Or, even if Su Qin knew, he wouldn't think too much about it. Nanzhao is located in the southwest. It is a small country. There is not even a grade 1 great grandmaster in the whole country. Even if the restriction of moon worship is gone, what can they do? After Su Qin returned to the imperial palace, he returned to his usual life. From the time Su Qin left, it had only been half a day. No one in the entire imperial palace thought that in this short period of time, Su Qin would travel tens of thousands of li, destroy the Holy Moon Church in Nanzhao, and then slowly return. At night, Su Qin sat cross-legged. Bits and pieces of information about the moon-forging divine technique flowed in his mind. Moon-forging divine technique is a divine sense secret technique that can stabilize Su Qin's divine sense to a great extent. Okay, let's start. Su Qin closed his eyes, and a huge amount of divine sense began to brew in his body, constantly dispersing and reorganizing according to the method of moon-forging divine technique. If it was someone else, even a legend like Venerable Arhat, it would take a lot of time to fully comprehend this moon-forging divine technique, and even those with poor comprehension would not be able to get started at all. After all, moon-forging divine technique involves the forging of divine sense. If one is not sure that they have fully comprehended it, who would dare to mess around with their own divine sense? But Su Qin is different. After the system's infusion, his mastery of this divine sense secret technique has probably reached the level of the founder. Although it is his first time practicing it, he is very familiar with it. 1. Under Su Qin's control, his huge divine sense suddenly spread out, turning into extremely small thoughts, and then these thoughts were recombined to construct a more stable divine sense. Under normal circumstances, Venerable Arhats or martial arts legends' divine sense would be scattered, but the moon-forging divine sense could reassemble the scattered divine sense and unleash a power that far exceeded the original divine sense. It was just like charcoal and diamonds. They were obviously made of the same material, but because of the different structural combination, they showed two completely different forms. It was the same for divine will. However, compared to external substances, divine sense was much finer. The slightest carelessness could damage the foundation of divine sense, causing great hidden dangers. Even Su Qin wouldn't have dared to split his divine will like this without the moon-forging art. As his divine sense continued to reorganize, Su Qin felt that his mind was becoming clearer and clearer, and his thoughts were becoming more agile. It's about time. According to the description of the moon-forging divine art, I should have already mastered it. Su Qin slowly opened his eyes and carefully sensed his surroundings. A look of surprise appeared on his face. Although my divine consciousness is much weaker now, its quality is much better than before. Su Qin was overjoyed. Moreover, the stability of my divine sense has also improved my cultivation speed a lot. Su Qin slightly nodded, his thoughts fluctuating. If a grade 1 great grandmaster wants to go further, he needs to transform his body, internal strength, and divine sense. Venerable Arhat and legends also pay attention to the body, true essence, and divine sense. Whether it is the Venerable Arhat who just entered the first heavenly layer or the Venerable Arhat who cultivated to the limit, the body, true essence, and divine sense are the three cornerstones of oneself, the most fundamental things. A strong body can nurture more divine sense. Similarly, a strong divine sense can counterattack the body and speed up the cultivation speed. At this moment, Su Qin was in a similar state. Next, I have to work hard and strive to reach the great Arhat realm as soon as possible. Su Qin calmed down and thought silently in his heart. The great Arhat realm is the realm after Venerable Arhat and is equivalent to the Earth Immortal. Of course, whether it is the Great Arhat Realm or the Earth Immortal Realm, they are essentially different names for martial artists of the same level. In fact, the essence of the power controlled by the two is the same, similar to Venerable Arhat and legends. Next, Su Qin once again devoted himself to cultivation. Every day, except for cultivation and signing in, he hardly paid attention to anything else. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, occasionally brought his children to chat with Su Qin, letting Li Yuan and Li Wan get closer to Su Qin. Compared to other imperial family heirs, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was more willing to let his children get closer to Su Qin. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, has been on the throne for so many years and is used to people's cunning, But he still can't see any scheming in Su Qin. Only in front of Su Qin does the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, feel that he is not the emperor, but the poor scholar who had nothing. And since the last time Su Qin reminded the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, that the premise of removing the vassals is that he has enough confidence, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, has never mentioned the matter of removing the vassals in front of his subjects. Su Qin knew in his heart that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was enduring. Enduring is not cowardice, nor is it admitting defeat, but for the future of the Empire of Tang. Li Si, who has lived 2 lives, naturally knows that the most effective way to remove the vassals is to implement the order of pushing grace. As long as the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, issued a decree to allow the vassals to divide their territories equally among their children. In this way, the territories of the vassals will be smaller and smaller. Although the overall situation will not change, it will fall into the hands of different people, and the power will be scattered, which will weaken the power of the vassals without bloodshed. However, the implementation of the order of pushing grace is based on the premise that the vassals are obedient. In other words, you have to let the vassals do what the order of pushing grace says. But now the problem the Empire of Tang is that the vassals are simply ignoring the imperial power. Let alone the order of pushing grace, even if the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, issued any decree, when it comes to the vassals' territories, it is as if there is no decree. Besides, the vassals are not fools. Every vassal has countless strategists under their command, and they can certainly guess the effect of the order of pushing grace on the vassals. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, 3 years have passed. During these 3 years, although the Empire of Tang is still restricted by the vassals in various places, on the whole, it shows a trend of prosperity. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, is bold and decisive, developing business, increasing taxes, and the silver in the treasury is enough. In addition, under the coaxing and pestering of Princess Li Wan, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, finally agreed to let her practice martial arts. In fact, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, does not want to see Li Wan step into martial arts. In the view of the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, every martial artist has not been polishing their body for decades, and their life is plain. Li Wan, as a princess, does not need to suffer this at all. On this day, in the right spring square, Su Qin is sitting cross-legged, and his breath is flowing endlessly, slowly but steadily rising. Suddenly, Su Qin's breath suddenly stopped, and the rising speed suddenly slowed down, and then calmed down after a while. And at this time, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes, and a smile appeared on his face. Finally, it is complete. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated, and his face showed joy. Chapter 135. Inside the right spring square. Su Qin slowly retracted his aura. Compared to my previous estimate of reaching the peak of the 4th heavenly layer, it's at least 1 to 2 years earlier. Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. One must know that with Su Qin's current eyesight, even if his estimate was wrong, it would at most be half a month to a month, but now, it was a full year to 2 years earlier. It should be the moon-forging divine art that stabilized my divine sense and improved my cultivation speed. Su Qin speculated in his heart. Although he knew that stabilizing his divine sense was beneficial to his martial Dao cultivation when he practiced the moon-forging divine art, he didn't expect the improvement to be so great. That trip to Nanzhao was worth it, Ruan Tuan said. Su Qin nodded slightly, quite satisfied. Through the trip to Nanzhao, not only did he obtain this divine sense secret technique, but he also learned the specific level of the overseas martial artists. Since I've reached the peak, I should prepare to break through to the 5th heavenly layer. Su Qin slowly got up, walked out of the right spring square, and walked slowly along the shaded path. The East Palace was still as deserted as ever, but Su Qin had long been used to it, and even enjoyed it. For Su Qin, the power, beauty, and wealth of the secular world were all ephemeral, only his own strength was fundamental. It was the same in the Shaolin Temple, and it was the same in the palace of the Emperor of Tang. Otherwise, with Su Qin's ability, even if he wanted to sit on the dragon throne, it would be a matter of a thought. Who in the Empire of Tang could stop him? But the emperor was not someone who could be just because he wanted to. Throughout the 500 years of the Empire of Tang, except for the founding ancestor, almost all the emperors had no achievements in martial Dao. Even the founding ancestor only established the Empire of Tang after stepping into the realm of martial arts legend. Not only the Empire of Tang, but the emperors of all the countries in the world were similar. Why is this? A person's energy is limited. If one wants to achieve great achievements in martial Dao, they must invest a lot of energy, but the emperor couldn't do it. This was obviously in conflict with what Su Qin wanted. Su Qin walked in the East Palace unhurriedly, his thoughts empty. In the past 3 years, in addition to cultivation, Su Qin also signed in countless treasures. Although most places in the palace of the Emperor of Tang could only be signed once, there were still more than a dozen places where Su Qin could repeatedly fleece. For example, in front of the altar of the crop altar. In front of the Taiji Palace, he signed in and obtained the celestial being aura gazing technique. In front of Bright Jade Square, he signed in and used the 18 dragon subduing palms. Among them, the vermilion fruit was the most helpful to Su Qin. In terms of medicinal efficacy, the vermilion fruit was at least dozens of times better than the blood bodhi. Even Su Qin needed a week to barely digest one vermilion fruit. One had to know that ever since Su Qin's body underwent the 4th transformation and entered the Arhat realm, even if he absorbed the 9 revolutions whirling pill and glazed golden core, it only took a moment. But the vermilion fruit took a week, so one could imagine how terrifying its medicinal efficacy was. Unfortunately, I only signed in a few hundred vermilion fruits in 3 years. Su Qin shook his head slightly, feeling a little regretful. Originally, after signing in thousands of blood bodhi and thousands of drops of innate spirit liquid, he was prepared to use the sign-in opportunity on other things. But ever since he signed in the vermilion fruit, Su Qin's interest in the crop altar was reignited. There was also the secret technique, the celestial divination technique, which also made Su Qin very happy. The celestial divination technique can observe the qi of the world, similar to Su Qin's eye of truth. The difference is that the celestial divination technique is not a divine ability. Su Qin also discovered that if he combined the celestial divination technique with the eye of truth, he might be able to see half of the Empire of Tang at a glance. As for the 18 dragons subduing palms, it is an offensive internal divine art. With Su Qin's current strength, once he uses it, he might be able to summon 108 golden true dragons, sweeping through everything. Overall, the 18 dragons subduing palms is an average divine art. Among the countless divine arts and secret techniques that Su Qin has mastered, it can probably squeeze into the top 500. In addition to the above 3 items, Su Qin also received a large number of other treasures from signing in. There were cultivation techniques, secret techniques, medicinal pills, and spirit fruits. All of them were of great help to Su Qin. Su Qin slowly circled around the East Palace. When he returned to the right spring square again, he found that the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had been waiting outside for a long time. Third brother. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, saw Su Qin and waved his hand. After 3 years, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's temperament has become much more dignified, and he has also aged a lot. White hair has already grown out of his temples. You're here? A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. Su Qin glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and asked casually, "Have you encountered something troubling recently?" Although the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, has long been able to hide his emotions, how could he hide it from Su Qin? Some matters in the imperial court. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, shook his head, raised the wine pot in his left hand, and said with a smile, "Third brother, let's drink today." Su Qin did not refuse. Every time the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was faced with a major decision, he would come to Su Qin to drink. After the two drank a few cups, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at Su Qin with envy. "Sometimes I really envy third brother. He stands aloof from worldly affairs and is peaceful and carefree. Unlike me, although I am the emperor of a country, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, sighed with emotion. Su Qin heard this, his eyes calm, and he said nothing. Although he seemed to be at ease, how many people in the world could stay in one place for decades and do the same thing? Let's not talk about this. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, put down his wine cup and asked, "Third brother, do you know what happened in Nanzhao 3 years ago?" Nanzhao? Su Qin looked at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng. "That's right. Third brother, you don't go out, so you shouldn't know." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly thought of something and continued. The moon worship in Nanzhao was razed to the ground overnight, leaving behind a palm print that suppressed the entire mountain, tisk. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, paused and said with emotion, "I always thought that there were no martial arts legends in this era, but now it seems that the palm print that destroyed the entire moon worship was probably left by a martial arts legend." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, knew about this more than 2 years ago, and he was extremely shocked and thought it was impossible. But as time passed, more and more information came to his ears, and he gradually accepted this fact. Su Qin heard this, glanced at the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and did not say anything. Not only did he know, but he was also the one who left the palm print. "I don't know in my lifetime if I can see the glory of a martial arts legend from afar." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked very longing. The Empire of Tang had been established for more than 500 years, and only Taizu was a martial arts legend. After Taizu, the strongest was only peak rank 1. As for this era, the Empire of Tang did not have a martial arts legend. Since Eunuch Zhao's death, there was not a single peak rank 1 in the entire palace of the Emperor of Tang. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was helpless, but there was nothing he could do. Martial arts cultivation in the early stage can be piled up with resources, but in the later stage, especially the transformation of a grade 1 great grandmaster, external resources may be useful, but the most important part can only be relied on oneself. Chapter 136. Soon, 2 hours passed. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng got up and prepared to return to the Immortal Palace to deal with political affairs. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng smiled as he looked at Su Qin and said, "After chatting with the third brother today, I feel much less depressed." Su Qin shook his head and did not reply. The next day, in the Taiji Palace, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng sat on the dragon throne and looked down at the court. "I am very grateful for the vassals guarding the border for the Empire of Tang." The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng did not beat around the bush and said directly. In the past 3 years, although the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng did not mention anything about removing the vassals, he had thought about it many times in his heart. In the end, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng realized that directly removing the vassals was not advisable. It would easily cause turmoil in the Empire of Tang and the vassals to rebel. But directly removing the vassals was not an option, but indirectly removing the vassals kept appearing in the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng's mind. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng spent 3 years and finally came up with a way to indirectly weaken the vassals' strength. In the Taiji Palace, the court officials listened to the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng's words and looked at each other, confused. A few years ago, they saw the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng fly into a rage and wanted to remove the vassals, but now, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng was very moved by the vassals' actions. Just when the court officials were confused, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng's words continued to ring. "The vassals have worked hard and made great contributions, but they cannot be separated from the contributions of every child in the family. I have decided to pass down the order and allow the vassals to divide their fiefs to each child." The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng said slowly. As soon as these words came out, the court officials quieted down. A few of the courtiers thought quickly and quickly understood the purpose of Emperor Li Sheng's actions. It was nothing more than dividing the power of the kings in this way. It may not be seen in a short time, but in a long time, decades or hundreds of years will pass, and the disaster of the kings will inevitably be solved. "Your Majesty, this is not appropriate." A court official immediately stood up and bowed to the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng and said, "The Emperor's eldest son has priority in the succession of the vassals. If your Majesty abolishes this law, the vassals will be dissatisfied." This minister was sincerely thinking for the Tang Empire. Even he could understand the deeper meaning of Emperor Li Sheng's order, so how could the kings not understand? Don't worry, I'm just allowing it, not ordering it. If the vassals don't want to, they can refuse. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng was very calm. Before today, he had thought everything clearly. After chatting with Su Qin for a while last night, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng was more clear about what he was doing. His decree was an open conspiracy. The vassals could not implement it, but what about their children? Normally, after the death of the old vassal, the eldest son would inherit the position of the vassal. As for the other brothers of the eldest son, they would be left to fend for themselves. In this case, once the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng allowed the other children of the vassals to inherit the fiefs, it would inevitably cause division among the vassals. Except for the eldest son, the other children would spontaneously support the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng. I have made up my mind. You don't have to say any more. The Emperor of Tang Li Sheng saw that there were still courtiers who wanted to dissuade him, so he waved his hand and left the Taiji Palace. At the same time, outside the East Palace, Su Qin's eyes were calm as he looked in the direction of the Taiji Palace. In the end, he still came up with the decree of pushing grace. Su Qin shook his head slightly and sighed. Last night, Su Qin knew that the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng had something on his mind, so he paid a little attention to the other party today. Sure enough, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng made a move today, however. Although the decree of pushing grace could greatly solve the problem of the vassals, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng made a mistake. The order is reversed, Su Qin thought silently in his heart. If the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng had already defeated all the vassals before implementing the decree of pushing grace, and they were all afraid of him, then implementing the decree of pushing grace would inevitably eliminate all future troubles and completely solve the problem of the vassals. But now, the most important premise had not been achieved, and implementing the decree of pushing grace at this time was tantamount to touching the bottom line of the vassals. Although Su Qin knew that the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng's action was inappropriate, he did not stop it. If the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng was assassinated, Su Qin might intervene, but when it came to national affairs, it was still up to the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng to make his own decisions. It's good to let him suffer. Su Qin turned and walked back to the East Palace. For a long time, the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng had been too smooth. Since he ascended the throne, the Emperor of Tang had paved everything for him, and Su Qin had secretly helped him clear the obstacles twice, which deterred the other countries, so everything went smoothly. Although the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng had done a lot of practical things, and the Empire of Tang was also thriving under his governance, but there were many things in this world that were not smooth sailing. Soon, as the Emperor of Tang Li Sheng's orders spread throughout the territories of the 10 vassals, it caused a sensation among the children of the vassals. However, this sensation did not last long before it was suppressed by the vassals. The 10 vassals gathered in a small town. This town did not belong to any of the vassals' territories, but it was close to the vassals' territories, so generally, when the vassals had something to discuss, they would choose to meet here. The Emperor of Tang in Chong and city is quite bold, daring to meddle in the affairs of us vassals. The Fanyang king's eyes were cold as he glanced at the other 9 vassals and sneered. When the order of pushing grace was passed to their territories, these vassals realized that something was wrong, and when they noticed the eager gazes of their children, they were sure that it was the Emperor of Tang's doing. With just a few words, he can divide our territories and make brothers turn against each other. This the Emperor of Tang is not only bold, but also vicious, the Shufang king of Gojoseon also said, his tone full of coldness. As vassals, they were hereditary vassals, one generation of vassals, and the next generation of vassals. They were high and mighty, so they naturally did not want to see their descendants constantly divided and eventually become playthings in the hands of the Emperor of Tang. Then what should we do now? The Emperor of Tang has begun to destroy the foundation of U.S. vassals. Are you still going to do nothing? The Norland king asked. He wanted to know what the other vassals were thinking. Of course we won't be indifferent. The Fanyang king shook his head and said, why don't we kill the Emperor of Tang? Since he's disobedient, we'll change the Emperor of Tang. the Jiannan king suddenly said. As soon as he said that, the other vassals were immediately tempted. However, the Shuofeng king of Gojoseon shook his head and said, "So what if we kill him? Which of us vassals is not feared by the past the emperor of Tang? Even if we kill this one, will the next one be obedient? Besides, the emperor of Tang's palace should be overseen by some royal ancestor. It's not appropriate for us to assassinate the emperor of Tang in his palace." The Shuofeng king of Gojoseon said softly. Whether it was the death of the two peak grade 1 great grandmasters, Nanming King Wuyang and Yin Jiubat outside the imperial city, or the inexplicable disappearance of Yi Guqing and Shimin Chuexue in the emperor of Tang's palace, it all showed that there was a great terror in the emperor of Tang's palace. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.